And with that, I'll ask Claudia to do the roll call.
Good afternoon. Director Atwater.
Present.
Director Millibar.
Present.
Director Stamera.
Aye.
Director Palmer.
Here.
Director Martin.
Present.
Director Chang.
Here.
Director Anaptawi.
Present.
Excellent. We have a quorum.
Agenda item 2 is next is going on to agenda item 3, the Pledge of Allegiance. If you please put your hand over your heart and please follow me. I pledge of allegiance
To the flag of the
of the
United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
One nation, under God.
God, indivisible, with liberty and justice
justice
for all. Great. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 4, the public comments. And I'll ask Claudia if we have anybody who's requesting to comment now.
We have one public comment for Kurt Terrace would like to provide comment.
Yes, this is Kurt Terrace. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Hi. I'll begin my comment. My name is Kurt Terrace. I own a company called Infrastructure Improvement, Inc. And we submitted a proposal to the Delta Conveyance Authority for its program manager contract. And that was done in 2019. And since then, we've reviewed the documents that were finally given to us, and we determined that we were inappropriately disqualified for that contract. While we were inappropriately disqualified for the contract.
Somebody needs to mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
While we were inappropriately disqualified, the firm that was awarded the $40 million contract failed to provide critical information that was a requirement of the proposal. And that includes their litigation history, includes their conflict of interest history. Well, my company, we provided all that, and we were still disqualified. So we are requesting reimbursement of our costs to submit that proposal. And I submitted a letter to your board, and I just wanted to confirm that you received my letter. I also like my comments reflected in the minutes of your board meeting. I noticed that in the past, you recorded the comments from individuals, or at least noted that the individuals spoke. I'd like my name in the record as having addressed you today with my request. And we are a small business. We're a disabled veteran-owned business, and we did everything we should have to compete for that contract. Yet for some odd reason, we were not allowed to compete for that contract, and we incurred costs. And there's more than me that's in my firm that submitted our time for this proposal. We have several small businesses and disabled veteran businesses that combined with us to submit that proposal. And we respectfully request reimbursement of our costs to do that. I look forward to your response to my letter, and appreciate your time to speak today. Thank you.
Welcome, and we will, and we have responded in the past, and we'll follow up with you. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Let's move on to agenda item 5, approval of the minutes. We have 2. One, December 17th, the regular board meeting in 2020, and then we had a special board meeting on February 3rd, 2021. So I'm looking for a motion to approve.
I have a change. Just it's minor.
Director
It's
Palmer?
minor. Yeah, sorry about this. It's really minor. I just noticed it when I was reviewing a short while ago. For December 17th, it's on item 7C. I'd like to have it just corrected to say Mr. Finney has a Master's of Science, not a Matter of Science.
Oh, it's just a typo, yeah.
Yeah, just a typo. And then on item number 9, it was kind of a weird sentence. I think it should read, as it is developing and the necessary readjustments. It was, let's see, it's item number 9, and it had to do with something that I said. I think it was about us going forward. So if you could just review that sentence, I can find it in a second. Or tell you what, since it is a typo type of thing, if it's okay with you guys, I can let you know exactly where it is later, and then we could approve the minutes as they will be amended with the typo fix. I should have put down what page it was, but I did not. I apologize.
Okay. Well, Josh, is that okay to approve subject to
I think it was with
clerical errors?
Yeah, absolutely. We would just want request that the motion reflect that it be subject to correcting a typo in item 9 on those minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah.
May I have a second from one of the board members?
Okay.
Second,
Okay.
Millibar.
Thank you, Director Millibar. And I'll ask Claudia, do we have anybody have public comments on the minutes?
Not on the meeting minutes, Director.
Great. I didn't expect it, but I just wanted to clarify. So we have I'll ask you go ahead and do the roll call. Then we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
Butter,
Aye.
Director Millibar,
Aye.
Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Palmer,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anupdawi,
Yes.
or approval of the minutes.
Excellent. Agenda item 6 is the consent calendar. We don't have any items on there. So we'll move on to.
February 3rd yet, did we, Richard?
I'm sorry, what?
I don't think we did February 3rd minutes yet, did we?
Oh, I was assuming that you approved both of them at the same time.
Oh, is that okay, Josh?
Yes, and I thought the motion was for both as well.
Oh, okay, because I just had one. There's a typo on the February 3rd one too. I'll let Claudia.
Well, and the motion was perfect then. Yeah. Okay. If we're all agreed that we approved A and B, and both of them have minor typos that will be fixed in the minutes.
It's the teacher in me. What can I tell you?
Yes, well, you're doing a great job. Well, let's move on then. Again, as I indicated, we don't have any consent calendar items, but we'll move on to 6A, and I'll turn that over to Catherine to do the introductions of the staff presentation.
So the first presentation Nelson, General Counsel, will do seeking the board to adopt a resolution approving updated bylaws. So Josh, take it away.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, President Atwater. So the item before you is an update to the bylaws. So with the new joint powers agreement, we do need to update the bylaws to make sure that the bylaws are consistent with the new JPA. And in your packet is both a clean and red line copy of the draft bylaws before you. And the staff report has a bullet point overview of the most important changes. And I'll just briefly run through those before we open it up for questions. The first change, of course, is to the board composition. So previously we had a 4-member board. Now we have a 7-member board with 1 representative from the Class 2 member agencies, excluding Santa Clara, 1 representative from Class 3, 5, and 7, 2 representatives from Class 8, 1 representative from Kern County Water Agency, 1 representative from Metropolitan, and 1 representative from Valley Water. On the officers, the officers are remaining the same. It'll be president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. The one important change in the new JPA is how the president and vice president are appointed. So previously there was a rotation system that rotated those offices among the different member agencies. That's been removed, and instead, all officers will now be appointed by and serve at the pleasure of the board. Officer terms will remain a 2-year term calculated on the fiscal year. And of course, we actually have an item later on this agenda to fill a vacancy in the secretary position. Third important change is to board voting. So under the prior JPA, the majority of decisions were by a majority vote of the board, but there were some decisions that were subject to supermajority. The new JPA modifies that slightly so that now all board votes will be by majority vote, and then some decisions, which are outlined in the staff report, but generally relate to indebtedness or budget type matters, are subject to a process of reconsideration. The way that would be handled under the proposed bylaws is that if an item was subject to reconsideration, immediately following the initial board vote to approve it, any member of the board could request reconsideration. Once that request was received, as staff, we would agendize that item for reconsideration at a future board meeting. And when that item was reconsidered by the board, voting would not be based on a majority, one seat, one vote, but rather voted on what's called the contracted proportionate share. And it would require 70% of the contracted proportionate share for an item to be reconsidered. And then if it was reconsidered, of course, it would not move forward. And alternative action would need to be considered by the board at that point. Moving to contracted proportionate share, this is a new concept in the revised JPA. The basic idea behind it is that the contracted proportionate share is the share of Delta conveyance costs or planning costs that each member agency or collections of agencies that appoint a seat represent. There is one change here in the bylaws from the JPA. The JPA anticipated two things. One, it anticipated that all DCA member agency, all participating water agencies, would be DCA members. It also anticipated that the project would be fully subscribed. Because we have a situation where we have two participating water agencies that are not DCA members, as well as some portions of the project which are currently unsubscribed, we actually have a contracted proportionate share which is less than 100. To ensure that the voting for reconsideration is based on 100, contracted proportionate share is calculated in the bylaws based on the percentage of DCA member agency planning costs that a agency or collection of agencies has agreed to fund, and that's the way the votes will work. And attached to the bylaws in Exhibit A is a chart with those percentages, as well as the proposed voting share. One last important thing on contracted proportionate share is, of course, while most agencies, most seats will vote their agency or collection of agencies aggregate contracted proportionate share, our two Class 2 directors, Class 8 directors, of course, will vote 1/2 of the total Class 8 contracted proportionate share because, of course, there are two seats there. And then the last noteworthy change to the bylaws is on the committees. We're clarifying that the Environmental Compliance and Mitigation Committee, which was something that was in the initial JPA, will be formed by this board if and once DWR approves some sort of Delta conveyance project. Of course, while we're in the planning phase, it would be premature to have that sort of committee. In addition, all committee assignments will be appointed by the president and subject to board ratification. Other amendments are largely related to formatting and cleanup. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Members of the board, any questions about the changes to the bylaws? Seeing none, I know we've all been looking at this for a while. I asked Claudia, please, on each of these staff reports, let me know if there's any public comments. Do we have any public comments related to the changes to the bylaws?
Director Atwater, at this time, we do not have any public comment requests for this item.
Okay, great. All right, then I'm looking for a motion to approve.
And move we approve?
And a second.
Tally, second.
Thank you. So Claudia, would you please, we got a motion and a second, please call the roll.
Of course, Director Atwater,
Aye? Yes?
Director Millibar,
Aye.
Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Palmer,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anabdawi.
Yes.
Excellent. The resolution is passed.
Great, thank you. 7B is consider passing a resolution to approve amendments to amendment number five, excuse me, to the joint powers agreement. And I assume, Josh, you want to give that
Yes, thanks,
presentation too.
President Atwater. This item is amendment number 5 to the Joint Exercise of Powers Agreement. As a reminder, the Joint Exercise of Powers Agreement, or the JEPA as we call it, is the contract between the DCA and the DWR, which currently outlines the services that the DCA is providing to the department during the planning phase for a potential Delta conveyance project. The JPA has been amended a number of times and proposed before you as one additional amendment. There are two components to the amendment. The first is an administrative amendment related to the scope of the DCA's agency under the JEPA. The proposed edit will clarify that the DCA is authorized to act as DWR's agent under permits that the department has obtained for related planning work. I guess, on the table right now, or most immediately, this will include some of the geotechnical work that the DCA will be undertaking this spring. But in the future, it could include additional work within the scope of DWR services. The second part of the amendment relates to repayment of what's called the DWR initial contribution in the JEPA. This is amount of funds that have been initially provided to the DCA by DWR during the planning phase to act as sort of seed money for DCA services. That amount has been changed, and the deadline to repay that has been modified a number of times. This amendment would not change the amount of those funds, but would move the deadline to repay them to January 10th, 2023. That's all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Concise presentation. Any questions about the amendments, the Fifth Amendment to our JPA agreement? Hearing none, then I'd ask for a motion to approve in a second.
Director Atwater, we do have a public comment request.
Oh, okay, great. I'm glad you told me. Let's go ahead and hear that before we ask for a motion.
We have OSHA Missouri, who would like to provide public comment.
Hi, this is OSHA Missouri on behalf of local agencies of the North Delta. Tim, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. It's always harder when we're not in person. I guess, yeah, I was a little surprised to see this on the agenda, and I have more questions than comments, I think, because I was under the impression that the, big impetus to get the water districts to pledge funding for 2 years of additional planning on the tunnel that occurred in the fall was because there was a commitment on the part of the DCA to repay the funds that have been advanced by DWR by January 10th, 2021. And that deadline was reflected in various DWR and DCA documents, including a letter sent by Tony Myers in July of 2020. And I know there are, I think, significant legal questions about whether it is authorized for DWR to advance funds to the DCA in this way, since this is not a unit of the state water project and there is no approval in place for the Delta Conveyance project as part of that overall system. So again, I believed that there was a rush in order to meet this deadline, and then now I'm seeing that this deadline has been extended another 2 years, and I think that puts the general public as well as the service area water recipients within SWP in a bad position because there's all this money being put out by DWR that is not being repaid by the contractors who have come forward that say they want to participate in this project. And I imagine that's because there's just not enough money to repay what I would consider to be a debt and move forward with the planning. So as you know, I have grave concerns regarding the propriety of this project in many regards, but I think this is an irresponsible and violates the promises and perhaps the statutory and contractual duties that were previously established. So I don't think there's a basis for the amendment that allows this extension of another 2 years to take place. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have any other comments, Claudia?
Not at this time, Director.
Great. Well, I appreciate your comments. I'll ask for any discussion by the board on this item, or I'll accept a motion.
I move we approve.
Thank you. We have a second?
Jenkins, second.
Great. Claudia, please call the roll.
Director Atwater,
Yes?
Director Villabar,
Aye.
Director Sturmera,
Aye.
Director Palmer,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anapdawi.
Yes.
The resolution passes.
Great. We'll move on to 7C, and Steve Boy, who's a Metropolitan Water District Director who was on the board, went off, and he was our secretary. So we're looking for somebody, a nomination of somebody, and we'll approve one of the 7 board members to be the board secretary. Does anybody have anybody you'd like to, you can recommend yourself, or you can nominate somebody?
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Director Milbar.
Great. Does anybody else have any other nominations? Well, if not, I would close the nominations and ask.
Here it goes again. Disconnection of his house. We've lost him. Or have we lost him? Your audio's gone, Richard.
It is. You can hear me, can't you?
Now we can, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking, I didn't mute myself. I was just asking again, we have one nomination, and I was going to close the nominations and ask for a vote from Claudia for the board to approve that unless somebody has another alternative candidate to suggest or nominate.
And President Atwater, the appointment would be by motion, so would request that we get a second to to Director Estromera's motion, and then we could proceed to a vote.
Director Palmer has seconded that motion, so we can go ahead now and consider that. I'll ask Claudia to do that.
Gladly. Director Atwater,
Yes.
Director Millibar,
Aye.
Director Sturmera,
Aye.
Director Palmer,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anapdawi.
Yes.
Excellent. Motion passes.
Congratulations, Director Milbar. We look forward to working with you as our board secretary.
Yes, thank you. I look forward to working with Claudia and the rest of the board as necessary. Thank you.
Let's move on to the next item, 7D, which is just a monthly report. I'll ask Catherine to kind of give the highlights of that.
Sure. Thank you, Director Atwater. Since this is the first official board meeting of this new board, and I welcome you all to to your first official meeting. I thought I would just page through the monthly board report, go through it in more detail than I typically do, and also would be soliciting comments and feedback from you either at today's meeting or afterwards on additional information that you may like to see in the report. I want this report to work for all of you. So if you flip to the, there's 5 sections to the report: summary of the work performed, stakeholder engagement, budgets, contracts, and schedule. So I'll walk you through each one of those sections. So we start with the summary of work performed. It's divided into the 4 core areas of our group: program management, administration, engineering, and field work. And here we provide a narrative of the key activities that we worked on in the reporting period. So for this report, this is the February board meeting. It represents work that was done in the month of January. Next slide. Stakeholder engagement has its own page. Typically on this sheet, we will highlight the previous SEC meeting in the previous month, but since the January meeting of the SEC was canceled and the December meeting was covered in our December board meeting, we don't have an SEC meeting to report on. And then we also include information on when the next meeting is. So our next SEC meeting is coming up next Wednesday, February 24th. The next section of the report is the budget section. And there's several data tables in this section. This first one is a high-level summary of our budget status. It includes a column with our original budget that was approved at the June board meeting of the fiscal year, our current budget, which takes into account any approved budget changes that were made. So in this case, we started with a budget of $34 million approved in June of 2020, and we reduced our budget by approximately $7 million, and our current budget is $27 million. There's a column of commitments. Those are contractual obligations against the budget line items, how much we have incurred to date in payments, and an estimate at completion for the budget line item with a column for variance. So right now, we are on track to hit our $27 million budget. Next slide. This slide is essentially the very similar table. It just drops down into more detail on the work breakdown structure line items underneath each of our major headings. So, for example, under the executive office budget, it takes it down one more level to management, our legal, general counsel, the audit that we need to do every year, our treasury, which is provided by Catano and MWD, and human resources. Those all roll up to that executive office budget line item. So there, this table takes about 3 pages, I think. So it just gives you a little bit more detail on the budget line items. And then we include a cash flow curve of our planned monthly expenditures in the dark blue and our invoiced expenditures in yellow, and then cumulative expenditures to date, and planned and to date. And what you'll see here is that because the invoice submission is delayed, we do this report the week before the February board meeting. So we haven't received invoices on a lot of the work that was done in the January time period. So there is a lag in the reporting on this curve. So at this time for a February board meeting, we would have nearly all of the December work period invoices in. So what you're seeing there in January and February just are indicative of the invoices that have been submitted into our system. So that's why you see such low values there. The next section is the contracts, and those are the commitments from the budget that you saw in the budget summary. So this table here has every single one of our vendors and what their current commitment is. And if there's any pending commitments. So for example, Jacobs, the commitment line there is a little over 13 million. That represents the value of the task order that was issued to them when we reduced our budget down to 27 million. So that's their current commitment level. And they've billed approximately 7 million to date, which represents about 53% spent. Most of these commitments are for the current fiscal year, but we do have some commitments in this table that span multiple years, particularly around some of our software contracts. So there's not an exact one-to-one relationship between our commitments and our budgets. I guess what that means is we can overcommit to our budget because some of the commitments span multiple years. All right, and then we also include a table in the contract section for our major contracts, looking at their small and disabled veteran business participation. We do have a goal of consistent with the state requirements of 25% small business enterprise participation and 3% disabled veteran business enterprises. So this is a summary of where we are on our major contracts. And the last section is a schedule status of our major activities that we're performing as part of our services. And this particular graphic is what we call a drop-down schedule. So what our scheduler does is meets with the team to find out where they are in terms of % complete on each of their activities. And then a drop-down bar, which is the orange bar, also called the status line here, indicates the status of that task. So if the bar is to the left of today's date, it means that we are behind schedule. So for instance, in this particular graph, our acquisition of temporary entry permits is running about 3 weeks behind where we plan to be at this time. Whereas we take, let's say, the Bethany alignment final draft, we're running about, maybe a couple days ahead of schedule. So the drop-down bar is a little bit to the right. So this is just an easy graphical way for you all to understand where we are schedule-wise on our primary work activities. And then it all rolls up to the program level. So overall, we're just a few days late on our activities for this fiscal year. Oh, Sarah, do you have a question? That was the last slide of the report, so I'm just glad to take any questions you may have on the schedule or
Right.
on the
I love the way this is so clear in terms of the contracts. I am wondering, would it be possible, just for the simplicity for my tiny brain, to maybe put an asterisk or some kind of an indicator where we have a multiple year contract going on that may not meet our, how it's set up in the budget? Is that ridiculous or what?
We can asterisk those.
It would just be useful, I think, just to kind of get an overview in terms of where we are with certain of the contractual agreements.
Yeah, there's only a handful of contracts that have multi-year agreements, and I think they almost all are software licensing. But I'll have Jennifer Malone take a look at that. I think there's just a handful of software licenses that are at least 3-year contracts, and so the commitment is actually spanning 3 years rather than 1. The budget for that line item in our budget is exactly what we're going to spend this year, but the commitment might be above. It might appear to be above the budget for that line item.
That's why that would be kind of nice just to have a little asterisk or some kind of an indicator to make it real obvious to the rest of us.
Yeah, that's easy enough.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Yes, President Waters, if I may have a moment.
Sure.
So, yeah, Catherine, great. Very nice report, very easy to understand. Maybe just a couple of questions. I think the first one, apologize for the newbiness of my questions here. So the review and approval of invoices, and we don't have to do that today, but maybe, at some point, if I could just get an explanation of the controls that are exercised, for that process. And then I think secondly is, I think on section 1, where the summary of work performed is, I think it's great. I wonder if maybe I missed it, but is there any discussion about what work is being considered for the next reporting period? I mean, it's good to have a retrospective look, but I'm always kind of looking and saying, okay, well, you've done this, and I'm looking forward. In this next month, I'm doing these activities, and so that way, in my mind, you can, for me, you can compare, what you set out to do versus what you've actually done.
Yeah, sure. We had that in there in an earlier version of this, and in fact, all last year it was in there. And I think in this mock-up, I took it out because after we've turned in our documents, a lot of what we're doing moving forward is in response to requests from Carrie. But we can put that section back in and make it the second page of the narrative. So the first page would be summary of work performed and anticipated work in the next month. A lot of it might seem like a repetition, but yeah, we can add that in. That's not a problem. And as for invoices, all contracts have a contract manager who's responsible for reviewing the invoices from a work performed perspective, and then it needs a second approver who we in our vernacular would be the functional leader of the group. So every invoice is reviewed by two people responsible for the work that's being performed. It also goes through an in-depth review by the invoicing group for compliance with the task order and contract. So they all go through a fairly thorough review, and we have an SOP on invoicing, and all invoices are submitted online and processed through our e-builder system. So there's complete visibility on the content of the invoice and its status in the process. And I'd be glad to share that SOP with you if you'd like.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Excellent. Other questions of Catherine? Hearing none, why don't we move on then to the planning schedule update?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Carrie to the group. In the orientation session that we did a few weeks ago at our first meeting, we talked a lot about the work of the DCA and our scope, and I thought it would be great for you all to meet Carrie Buckman, who is the environmental program manager, and have her go through her planning work and schedule and talk a little bit about how the DCA and DWR work together. So with that, I pass it off to Carrie.
Thanks. So thanks for having me, President Atwater and members of the board. For those of you that I haven't met yet, it's nice to meet you virtually. My name is Carrie Buckman. As Catherine said, I'm the environmental program manager for DWR. So it's my job to make sure that all of the different environmental planning and permitting efforts are moving forward in a coordinated fashion. So if we want to go to the next slide, my plan today is to provide an overview of where we are, what we've done recently, and where we're going in the next year, just to provide some context for what the DCA is doing, as well as what we're doing in coordination. So a couple of key things about 2020. We started 2020 with the state releasing the draft water resilience portfolio in January, which identified challenges and issues for water in California and potential strategies to address those challenges. And the Delta Conveyance project was included as a potential strategy. DWR also issued a notice of preparation for a proposed single tunnel project, which started the scoping process under CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act. We then had scoping meetings in February and March to collect scoping comments, and the scoping process continued through mid-April when the period closed. Jumping ahead on the timeline a little bit, in July, we published a scoping summary report, and that had a summary of the process that we went through and the comments we received. And it also had attachments that included the full text of all of the letters and the scoping meeting transcripts so that people can see every comment that was made. Okay, so then backing up a little to June, one of the things about this project that's a little different from past incarnations is that we do not have a federal partner. So DWR is the project proponent, and there isn't a similar proponent on the federal side. So one of the federal permitting agencies will need to comply with NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act. When federal agencies need to permit a project, they do need to consider NEPA compliance. So we needed to engage those permitting agencies so that they could identify which agency was the most appropriate to complete the NEPA documentation as the lead agency. So in June, we submitted a Section 404, Section 10 application for a permit to the Corps. We were not submitting it at the time because we thought that the permit would be issued soon. We just needed to engage the Corps in the process so that they could work with the other regulatory agencies and identify the appropriate NEPA lead. So they did determine that they should be the lead agency, and in August, they released a notice of intent to start the process to develop an environmental impact statement under NEPA, and that is continuing. Next slide, please. So this slide presents an overview of the environmental review process, particularly focused on CEQA, just to provide an idea about where we are and what's coming up. So as I mentioned, the first row we've largely done the initial outreach. We released a notice of preparation, we held scoping meetings, we released a scoping summary report, and we developed an outreach plan for agencies. There are a lot of agencies that are involved in planning and permitting, and so we have a plan that we reach out to all of them and collaborate with them as we're moving through this planning process. So we're right now on the project definition phase of the second line. So we're working to formulate alternatives to the proposed project. And then we're working with the DCA to define the proposed project and the alternatives. So that is a lot of what the DCA has been doing over the past year, is working on conceptual designs for those alternatives and the proposed project. We're next starting on the technical reports, where we are looking at technical aspects of the alternatives, and those reports will feed into an analysis of the potential environmental impacts of the alternatives and proposed projects, and we'll use that also to identify mitigation to avoid or reduce effects. We'll wrap that all up into the draft EIR in line 3, where we start with an administrative draft that's an internal draft for review, and then we go through review and revision and release a public draft EIR for public comment. And also we'll have public hearings to help people understand what's in the document and hear feedback. We'll then, in line 4, respond to the comments that we receive, make any appropriate changes to the environmental impact report, and release a final document and make a determination in the notice of determination on how to move forward. Next slide. So this is an overall schedule. I'm going to talk a little more in the next slides about more details about what's coming up in the next year, but this just gives you an overview of sort of where we sit now versus where we're going in the next few years. So right now, a lot of our work has been focused on the CEQA and NEPA processes. We are working to develop administrative draft documents for the EIR and EIS. They are going to be separate documents, but we're trying to coordinate them so that they stay lined up and the public review is at the same time to try to make that a bit easier for members of the public. So we're working on developing those internal drafts for the middle of this year, and then go through the review and revision process through early 2022. And then we'll have a public review period, and then the final EIR and EIS, as well as record of decision and notice of determination, are expected in fall of 2023. Simultaneously, we're starting on some of the other environmental processes. So the first lines here relate to the Federal and State Endangered Species Act. So we have started working on some of the basic sections for the biological assessment and incidental take permit application. These are the documents that we prepare to submit to the agencies as part of the compliance process. So we plan to submit those, the final versions, around the same time that we release the public draft EIR and EIS. We expect the biological opinion to take about a year to develop, and the incidental take permit, which is the state version, will probably take about the same amount of time. However, it can't be released until after, or it can't be finalized until after the CEQA process is done. So it's aligned with the end of the CEQA process. We'll also be working on a change in point of diversion for our water rights, a certification of consistency with the Delta Plan, and several other Delta permits like Section 404 and 408. And those are all going to be starting in 2022 and running through about mid-2024. So I'll talk a little about some of the details next, if we want to look at the next slide. So this is a little bit more of an update about what we're doing in the near term. So this year, what we're planning to do on CEQA and NEPA, a lot of our focus currently is on refining some of the modeling tools that we're planning to use in impact assessment. And we'll use those after we finish the modeling tools. We'll use the tools as well as other methods to assess potential effects of the proposed project and the alternatives. And then we will look at identifying mitigation measures to avoid or reduce impacts. And as part of that, we are planning to consider options to reduce impacts through design modifications. For example, say on a corner of a shaft site, we find a cultural resource If we move the shaft site a little bit to one side, we can completely avoid any potential effects. We would prefer to do that than to try to minimize or mitigate. So we would work with the DCA to make that change, to shift that site somewhere to avoid that resource. So once we get through those pieces, we will be developing and reviewing internal draft documents for both the EIR and the EIS. Next slide. So for the Endangered Species Act and the California Endangered Species Act, right now we're working to collaborate with the regulatory agencies to develop operational criteria. When we talk about building a proposed project that is 6,000 CFS, we wouldn't be able to operate that facility at 6,000 CFS all the time. It really depends on how much flow is in the river, and we have restrictions to make sure that we are reducing effects to water quality and fisheries and other resources. So what we're doing now is trying to develop an initial set of criteria to analyze. We're working with the regulatory agencies to try to incorporate some of their feedback. We will then analyze that set of criteria and then have a feedback loop where we look at the analysis results and then potentially change the operational criteria to try to further reduce or change the types of effects that we might see. So that's the main focus of the interactions that we're having with the regulatory agencies. We're also identifying tools to assess the potential effects to biological resources. And then we'll be working a lot of this year to develop preliminary draft materials for the biological assessment under ESA and the incidental take permit application under CISA. Next page. Just some other things that we're working on related to permits. For water rights, we are coordinating our EIR analysis with the state board. They will be a responsible agency under CEQA. That means that they have to use our EIR as the basis for a decision that they would be making. And because we will be petitioning for a change in point of diversion, we'll be starting that process in late 2021. So actually, that is a typo. It is late 2022. Sorry about that. I need to fix that typo. So we are starting in late 2022. So in the meantime, we are coordinating with the state board to try to make sure that the EIR has anything that they might need as a responsible agency as the basis for decision making. Additionally, for the Delta Plan, we will need to submit a certification of consistency with the Delta Plan as part of our environmental permitting process. So we're coordinating now with the Delta Stewardship Council staff through early consultation to talk through some of the things that we'll need to submit and ways that we can document consistency through that process. Next slide. In addition to the technical work that we're doing, I also wanted to talk about our community engagement plan and public outreach plan. We have quite a bit of activities planned in the next year or two, and just a few highlights. There's a lot here. We have a lot more on our website. So just a quick overview. We have a lot of public information materials where we try to help people understand the project. We have informational blogs. We have deep dive videos that we've been starting on different technical topics. We post materials on a regular basis to try to help people really understand the project. The public participation and public notification is focused on a lot of the formal public input processes. So CEQA requires public input at scoping and then also at the draft phase. So this identifies that there are some formal processes that we go through to be consistent with the environmental permitting processes. Tribal consultation and outreach. We are currently working on tribal consultation where we consult with tribes about potential resources. We're consulting under AB 52 and also DWR's tribal engagement policy. We are planning informational webinars, mostly for this summer. We're trying to provide technical information to the public to help them understand the work that's being done and provide information to help with future reviews of some of the more detailed project documents that will be coming out. On the next line, the Community Benefits Program. We're starting work now. We've been doing this for several months. Oh, if you could, there we go, thanks. To work with the community to create a process for identifying commitments as part of the project to protect and enhance the unique cultural, recreational, natural resources, and agricultural values of the Delta. We are participating in the Delta Stakeholder Engagement Committee. I attend every month, and we tend to provide some updates and information at all of those meetings, as well as listen to all of the really valuable feedback that we hear at those meetings. And then one more item on this page is agency coordination. So there are a lot of agencies that are involved in planning and permitting. And so we are working to coordinate with all of those agencies and make sure that their requirements are met. And one thing that is sort of across all of these is that we're focused on outreach to environmental justice communities. We did complete a survey to help guide that, that outreach in December. We're still processing results, so I don't have those ready to share yet, but hopefully at the next board meeting, I'll be able to share some of those preliminary results. Next slide. So just a little bit of information about ways that we expect to be working with the DCA in the next year. I'd say that one of the biggest efforts is the design efforts to modify facilities to avoid or minimize environmental effects. I talked about an example, a theoretical example regarding a cultural resource. Another example, a real one did come up recently where our wetlands team found a potential effect to wetlands associated with an access road. And we worked with the DCA team to relocate that road to avoid those effects. And wherever we can avoid, we would prefer that. So we will continue to be asking for those types of changes and shifts throughout the next year as we identify those impacts. We're also working with the DCA on several modeling efforts. One of them is a 2D modeling effort near the intakes to better understand how river flows, how the river would flow around the new intakes. And also we're looking at support from the DCA to help with some of the climate change modeling. We look to the DCA for support on soil investigations. I think you've heard that the DCA is leading all of the field work on those soil investigations. And then we're looking for permitting support as well, primarily related to the Section 408 permitting with the Corps of Engineers, where there's quite a bit of detailed flood-related information that's needed. And I think that that's my last slide. If we want to move to the next one, this is just my ways to stay informed slide. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Excellent, Carrie. Great overview of the process. Any questions from members of the board?
President Atwater, one question for Carrie. Great presentation. I think every time I hear this, I learn a little bit more. So maybe just kind of gauge my understanding of this. So we're going through doing all the engineering work that is needed to kind of support the application process for the alternatives analysis, and then kind of narrowing down eventually. I think you said by third quarter of this year, we'll have something a little bit more pinned down, to perhaps like one alternative where we're going to put that forward for consideration for our permits, right? Or our application, I should say. So it's after all that process, the draft and final EIR is generated before we do the change in point of diversion, as well as the Delta plan consistency, because there's something more focused for these agencies to look at. Is that the idea?
So we do not have a preferred alternative yet. We have a proposed project from the notice of preparation, but at this point we are treating all of the alternatives equally, and we're evaluating them in the draft EIR. And so we want to really understand what the potential impacts are before selecting a preferred alternative. We will identify a potential preferred alternative in the public draft, but we won't really make a decision on what to implement until after the final EIR is complete and the notice of determination. That said, we will need to have an alternative in our ESA biological assessment and ITP application. So after we finish the internal drafts this year, later in the year this year, we will have our first stab at a preferred alternative, but we want to make sure we always fully recognize and keep in mind that that could change up to and until we finish the notice of determination. That's really when a decision will be made based on all of the information that we received during the public review process and all of the information that's developed in the EIR.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that question. It helps to clarify the process. Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, and I'll ask Claudia again in case any public comments on this item.
Director Atwater, at this time, we do not have any public comment requests. request for this item.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on to agenda item 8, and that's the staff reports and announcements. So 8A, I'll ask Josh to give his general counsel's report.
Thanks, President Atwater. My report is written reports in the packet, and as you'll see, the majority of the items I worked on this month were actually on the agenda previously. So rather than going back over those, I'd open it up for any.
Good point. We approved your items. 8B, we'll have the treasurer's report. Katana, would you please?
President Atwater, I believe we may have had a public comment request on 8A. Is that correct, Claudia?
Oh, sure. Oh,
We do
go
have
ahead.
a request from Kurt Terrace on this item.
This is Kurt Terrace. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well.
Okay. I was just if this was any way related to my earlier matter regarding reimbursement of infrastructure improvement for its cost to submit a proposal, we would like our comment just add to the record that we feel that we have good grounds for requesting that reimbursement and wish to resolve this through that cost invoice that we sent you. Thank you.
Josh, do you want to respond to that, or just you have the public comment and you may want to address it?
Yeah, I would say that this report isn't related to Mr. Terrace's issue, but of course we'll respond appropriately. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
No.
Great. Looking forward to that. Moving on to agenda item 8B, the treasurer's report, and I'll ask Katana to provide that.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to meet you all virtually for those new members. I'm Katana Kasaine. I'm the treasurer and also the assistant general manager for MetWater and CFO for Metropolitan Water District. I do give this report monthly. And just generally, since some of you are new, what we do is really report on a very small amount of money that we hold, a little less than $800,000 of seed money that we received. And most of what we do is receive money from the DCO and receive the bills from the DCO, which is the Delta Conveyance Office. Once we get money from them, we pay the bills. You will see that we dip slightly below that $800,000 because we do prepay a few things, utilities and leases, so as we anticipate money from them. So we don't really have a lot of activities except receiving bills, paying bills. So you'll see us reporting this monthly. And so this report is for 2 months, and December and January report. And as of January, end of January, we had a little less than $685,000 in cash. As of February of this month, we have $4,079,812, and that's a fluctuation you'll see. And immediately once we receive the money, we'll then pay the bills. So we always anticipate to be between that $600,000 and $800,000 that we have as seed money. We do also, outside of this report, bring you an investment policy annually, and we do that according to the government code and make any changes as needed. We also bring you an audit annually. We just missed the last audit we just brought in December. So we and I believe if anything we change budgets or any other items, we do make comments or give you any updates as needed. So that's my report today. You have a bunch of small spreadsheets behind this report that if you have any questions, I am happy to answer. Hello?
For every month.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear me? I hope so. I lost you, Dr. Atwater.
Yeah, no, I could hear you fine.
Okay.
I was just going to say thank you for that, and if there's any questions from members of the board. Seeing none, 8C, Carrie Wagner, you gave the presentation on 7E. Do you also have any additional items you want to cover under 8C, the DWR Environmental Managers Report?
I think it has a lot of overlap. I think we largely already covered this, but thank you.
Appreciate it. Great. Let's move on to 8D. I actually have a request, an announcement. Now that we got the 7-member board, I think it's appropriate that we schedule a special board meeting. I'd like to do it in the first week of March, if possible, a closed session meeting to talk about transition and personnel and going forward. So ideally, I think I'll enlist Claudia to pull the board. But the first week of March, like if we did it on Thursday, March 4th, would be 2 weeks before our normal third Thursday of the month meeting. And that would get time for anything that we discussed in closed session. We'd be ready to take action possibly at a regular board meeting. So I'd like to schedule that. Please let me know, and I guess the best way to do that is have Claudia pull everybody. But as a tentative date, you can let me know. We could try and do it at 2 o'clock on March 4th, the Thursday. It's just sort of what we did in February. We did a special board meeting on February 3rd. We did the same sort of thing. But I want to make sure it's convenient for everybody. So let Claudia know, and we'll target March 4th at 2 o'clock. And if we have alternative, and if that doesn't work, we'll work quickly on alternative dates. And for each of you, if you have a question or give me a call, I'd be happy to discuss. I know we've had lots of conversations about that.
President Atwater's Gary Martin. I just wanted to point out there is an Aqua Groundwater Committee meeting that afternoon between 1 and 3. So some may be already slated to attend that, just to let you know.
And that's a good point. And as we pull that, we could do that in the morning if you want. I know some of us could spend all day on Zoom meetings, and so let's try and work that out. If anybody would prefer to do that, we need to have a concentration, and these sort of things, you never know how long it'll take, but I wanted to make sure we had ample time. We would plan on like a 2-hour, it doesn't need to take that long, but just in case we have a discussion among the board, we need to have available time to do that. Any other comments?
They will survey the board members and provide some dates and times that can work for the group.
Absolutely. I always know that if we try to do it now, we'd go on a do-lip. Everybody needs to look at their calendar and think through what schedules they have, and we'll try to find one that works for all 7 of us.
I'll send an email after this board meeting, so that way it sits at the top of everyone's email.
Excellent. And then moving on to agenda item 9, future agenda items. Does any of the board members have something they'd like to see on the agenda for the regular meeting in March, which is March 18th, just like today, February 18th?
So Director Atwater, we did get a public request, a public comment request from Kurt Terrace on this item.
On future agenda items?
This is Kurt Terrace. No comment.
Oh. Well, appreciate that. Okay. All right. I think we're ready to adjourn unless any of the board members have any other items they'd like to bring up under future agenda items. See none, then we are adjourned. Thank you for a really efficient meeting and good presentations.